Would you eat food that was purposefully made to poison you? Would you ride a roller coaster designed to deliver its passengers to a mangled death? Hopefully your answer would be, of course not, to both of these questions. But what about living in a building purposefully designed to degrade humanity? Probably you wouldn't give it a second thought. After all, what does its creator's design have to do with our experience of it? That's the problem, though. The creator makes his purpose obvious, confronting viewers with his ideas behind the design. And with pieces of art such as buildings, the architect always has a purpose behind the design, whether edifying or destructive. This problem especially matters for Christians. We live in a world at war with our God, at war with biblical values, actively and passively attacking the structures God has set up for our flourishing. Should we humor these opponents and allow them to create long-standing memorials to their attacks on our faith? No. Because modern architects invented an architecture that deliberately rejects the created order in Christianity, trying to fashion designs for a post-Christian world, Christians should strive to build structures that reflect God's design for the created order. In my speech, I will first focus on the history of modern architecture and the ideology behind its founders' designs. And then I will contrast them with other orders of architecture and answer the question why this topic even matters. But before we would dive in, I would like to clarify a few terms you may be unfamiliar with. For example, I will be constantly referring to the Bauhaus School of Architecture. The Bauhaus School of Modern Architecture was founded by the German architect Walter Gropius right after World War I, while Europe was coping with the tragedy which was the First World War. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the Bauhaus School inspired a focus on the functionality of objects as opposed to the beauty for mass society. It was the first wave of Gropius's modern architectural movement that has engulfed our culture today. For although it was shut down right before World War II to protect the architects from Hitler, its legacy lives on in our modern buildings, since nearly every art curriculum includes foundation courses on which, in the Bauhaus model, students learn about the fundamental elements of design. Bauhaus was also closely related to the nihilist movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The nihilist movement, according to Merriam-Webster, is a viewpoint that teaches that traditional values are unfounded and that existence is senseless and useless. It is a doctrine that rejects any objective ground of truth, and especially moral truths. One of its most famous proponents, Friedrich Nietzsche, is famous for saying, "God is dead and we have killed him," commenting on their mission to eradicate God and his statutes from their lives. Nihilists reject Christianity and believe that life is void of meaning, that morals are useless, and that these archaic practices and beliefs must be rejected for humanity to thrive. The Bauhaus attempted to take this nihilist view of the world and turn it into architecture, whereas previously, architects believed that the world was created by a transcendent being and designed their buildings to reflect this transcendence. Another term I would like to clarify is modernism. By using the word, I do not mean contemporary, current, or present day. Instead, I'm referring to the movement. As defined by Merriam-Webster, it is a self-conscious break with the past and a search for new forms of expression. Furthermore, I'd like to clarify that my argument will focus not on the beauty or lack of it in modern architecture, but rather on the ideas, worldviews, and purposes informing and guiding the modern architects in their design process. As I said earlier, modern architecture stems from the nihilist movement of the World War era, and therefore it is unsuitable for public use. Although a bold claim to say that this style is nihilist in character, it is in fact true. The nihilism of post-World War Europe poisoned Western architecture. While researching modern architecture, its origins and differences with other styles, I had the pleasure of interviewing architect Anthony Ferraro. During our conversation, I asked him if there was any ideological danger in creating churches in the modern style, to which he replied, yes. He said that modern architecture is more nihilistic in design than all other styles, and that it sprung from the world wars, which had caused cultural damage and damaged the cultural confidence of Europe. This is not a surprising response. Many other sources cite modern architecture as seeking to reorient society toward a rejection of the Christian God and values. For example, the founder of Bauhaus style, Walter Gropius, actively advocated for progress in the form of the destruction of the traditional family, using his architecture to spur this process. In his book, Living Machines, author E. Michael Jones quotes Gropius in his explanation of how evolution shows a progressive growth of the collectivization of what were formerly family functions, transferences that are naturally reflected in the type and form of buildings devoted to family life. He saw the function of the family as a community, designed to nurture life and morality, but with the new age, he believed that the family would disappear. In particular, the family's duties and functions would transfer to the state, and through this, families would be unneeded and non-existent, giving way to a purely individualist society. Gropius goes on to say that the shelter required for the now diminished and otherwise transformed family unit has changed in its nature in accordance with its changed function. These comments show us a key factor in the birth of modern architecture: its design and desire to provide structures that enable society to reject the ancient, God-given foundations of the family to an architecture centered on individuals looking to the state to fulfill his needs instead of the family. A practical example of this are the apartment buildings Gropius designed. They boasted small living quarters aimed at housing individuals, not families. These buildings also had common areas for all the inhabitants of the complex to commune in. So in essence, they had small private rooms and large community spaces, leaving no space for the family and providing limited privacy. And what did these structures communicate? That the family is unimportant, meaningless, just another shackle of the rotten pre-World War society to be thrown off. Jones recognizes the danger of this trajectory when he says that the house is the locus of the home. It is the primary building, sheltering the primary cell of society, the family, which is the nurturing ground of the values men have held most dear. Houses and family homes are not simply dwelling places in the fact that they are a shelter where a group of people eat, drink, and have their being. No, it is a place where the family teaches the truths of reality, of God, of morality. It is the basic building block of any functional society. The dwellings in which the family lives reflect this truth, and therefore they should honor the function for which they were created, a place in which the family is sheltered from harm and can flourish. Likewise, the form will impact the function. Just as a water bottle with its end cut off turns into a funnel, so too will the home's function be changed with redesign. By attempting to destroy this connection and redesigning the home in accordance with their socialist, nihilist beliefs, Bauhaus descendants have sought to destroy the foundation of society and create an architecture that emphasizes that the family is no longer the most important unit in the culture. Instead, it places an emphasis on the atomistic individual who stands alone within society and has no inherent connection to anyone. Likewise, other architects seeking to follow in the Bauhaus style sought to destroy the public's common perception of the home by designing it and forming it in a purely geometric, mathematical way. Art critic Roger Kimball, in his article for the magazine New Criterion, wrote that he stumbled upon an architectural prodigy, a Mr. Peter Eisenman. Kimball says that at Eisenman's presentation, a cube was presented. It was bisected. It was hollowed out. The cube was rotated, inverted, and elaborated and transformed by a series of algorithms into a house which the architect dubbed House 4. Kimball then explains that Mr. Eisenman's idea behind all this was to create a home which would alienate the individual from the known way in which he perceives and understands his environment. The point of this house was to make the inhabitant uncomfortable. And this informs us that Eisenman's world looked exactly like his drawing, which Kimball described as cerebral. There is no place for beauty, for emotion, for truth, for morality. The world runs on purely mechanical algorithms. There's nothing left to life or to the human. We are living machines and should be housed in such places befitting machines. But we are not machines. We are humans that live and breathe in the image of God, that were designed to bring glory to our Creator. We are not just machines. Why should we allow those shaping our public spaces to think of human beings as beings that only interact in mathematical ways? Similarly, In the book Positive Energy Homes, Creating Passive Houses for Better Living, Robin Brimblecombe and Kara Rosemeyer discuss their desire for sustainable, eco-friendly housing and their plans to achieve this. But sprinkled into their seemingly innocent manuscript is the underlying dogma that the home has no meaning. They make this clear, writing that the prime purpose of the house is to shelter us from harm, and that we ought to be impelled to create wholesome indoor environments. After laying this foundation, they turn to practical elements of the design, saying that the way we ventilate our homes is particularly crucial for thermal comfort and indoor air quality. Continually, the authors speak of the ways to make a functional home. Never do they address a crucial piece of the conversation: how the home should be set up from an ideological standpoint. And by doing so, they make an ideological statement. The home is void of meaning, and man is a machine. Make him comfortable, make him healthy, grant him his desire for indoor-outdoor living spaces, but don't on any account try to make him feel as if he were more than a cog in the machine of society. We must open our eyes to the degrading qualities and meaninglessness of modern architecture and seek to replace it with influences that support the truths of reality. But it doesn't end there. Renowned American architect Frank Lloyd Wright wished to change the home to suit more individualistic purposes. According to Sarah Williams Goldhagen, member of the board for the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, Wright gave architectural form to his vision of a dignified life for the contemporary American family. To do this, she claims that he celebrated individual freedom with light-filled, flowing living spaces. Notice his focus on individualism. Isn't he supposed to be designing a home? Here we see a sanctuary for the individual, or the idea of individualism itself. By nature, though, the home is the place where a community is formed and nurtured. Therefore, by carving individualistic dogmas into the walls, Wright poisons the original purpose and wreaks havoc on the familial structure within. Additionally, he believed in designing in harmony with humanity and the environment, creating a seamless connection between the built environment and nature. Notice this goal in comparison with architects before him. We see in both classical and Gothic styles the deliberate expansion of space upwards, towards heaven, towards the Creator. Notice that Frank Lloyd Wright intends to create a connection between not the built environment and God, but between the built environment and nature. He decided to change the focus of his architecture to nature and to make his buildings blend in with nature, rather than in harmony with the created order. While this may seem unimportant, one architect changing the influence of his designs, no one can deny the impact Frank Lloyd Wright has had on the architectural community, especially in his creation of the prairie style, which is the inspiration of so many homes now. Now, if this is what a home must not be, what should it look like? The house should support the idea of the family by providing places for the family to commune. Obviously, this does not mean that the entire house should be completely open. Everyone knows that we need privacy. Think of architect Susan Susanka's clients who, after buying a modern house with no doors on the bathrooms and only a half wall between the master bedroom and the living room, started having marriage problems. The architect says that there was no privacy in the house for anyone, which was clearly creating tension between husband and wife. When she went in and assessed the situation, she immediately solved their problems by installing doors and extending half walls up to the ceiling. Homes should provide privacy. It is necessary. Think of this in context of Philip Johnson's glass house. This, although he says it is similar to colonial homes in layout, divorces the concept of privacy from the home and living space. Now, in his defense, it was paired with what he called the brick house, which is the definition of privacy since it has hardly any windows. But still, the damage is apparent. Your life is open for all in the area to see. Every argument, conversation, and celebration might as well be on camera, for the world is offered every possible opportunity to look in on your life, because a machine has no need for privacy. On the other hand, this does not mean that we should have a collage of separate rooms, separating and dividing every single person and event from each other. Susanka tells us of another client whose house was incredibly claustrophobic because there were countless rooms, each designated for a specific activity. Besides simply creating a cramped and uncomfortable environment, this also prevents the family from congregating and being able to worship, celebrate, and commune with each other. Furthermore, it stops them from inviting others into their home, practicing hospitality and fellowshipping with other believers easily. The home must have a balance of those open spaces enclosed in order to fulfill its purposes. Combine this with a vertical axis pointing to the author of life, and you have created a place in which the family can thrive, a place in which those basic comforts which relax the mind and bring peace to the soul are met. Classical and traditional architecture alike uphold these values in their design, and therefore Christians should turn to them for the form of their buildings. To begin with, the classicists have a different, much deeper meaning of space within a building. In his book, The Architecture of the Classical Interior, Stephen Scenes mentions that to Roman architects, space was seen as a positive, as if it were a solid body. He then informs readers that space is characterized by human intentions, and that the Romans designed rooms whose volume pressed upwards, as if to break through to the light of the open sky. All of this draws readers to the understanding that the classicists treated space as something alive, and something they were to interpret, something they interpreted as reaching up to their gods, and in the Christian tradition, up to the God. Now, some of you may object that I am condemning certain pagans and elevating others. Why do I do this? I asked the same question of Mr. Ferraro, and he replied that goodness, truth, and beauty are universal, and that pagans before Christianity understood truth and were focused on relaying it. It is much like natural order and natural law. Everyone can understand that the family is important, just like everyone can attest that murder is wrong, except for the murderer and except for the individualist. The ancients understood that there was a higher being than themselves which they were to honor and obey. They simply imagined the wrong beings. Therefore, we can conclude that because deep meaning is placed on the way space is formed in a classical building, particularly in how it aspires to the heavens, it performs its function far better than its modern counterpart. While the evidence of modernism's sins lay before us, some may still hold to the belief that none of this truly matters. It is just a building, after all. However, based on the commands given Christians in the Bible, I believe viewers can truly grasp the importance of this subject. To begin with, the Bible constantly gives God's followers the task of glorifying Him in all that they do, including architecture. For example, David in the Psalms commands the people of God to declare His glory among the nations, His marvelous works among all the people. And Paul later echoes this, telling Christians in Corinth, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. The commands are obvious. In fact, I do not believe any Christian would dispute them. We are to honor God in all that we do. But the question still remains, how is this related to architecture? According to different studies, the style of a building communicates its architect's beliefs about it and its function. According to Donna Arnold, a professor of art history, an image of architecture chooses details in order to narrate and describe its subject. The professor argues that the beliefs behind a building are seen within the ornament the architect chooses to embellish or not embellish it with. Besides this, it is only right to reject those things that are inspired by hatred of God and His commands, things that were created to demote humanity, things that were intended to change the way we view God's institutions. Therefore, it does matter what style of architecture we support, for some styles are created to reject God and His commands, and while others support belief in Him. Modern architecture memorializes the rejection of God and the created order. Therefore, Christians must in turn reject it and create those things which honor God. From the nihilist influences on the style to its desire to change the function of our most basic spaces, modern architecture creates an unsuitable environment for society. It intends to shift our views of morality in the family, breaking down society's most basic structures. So what do we do in response? In all honesty, none of us are probably planning to build anything anytime soon, and neither would we be completely in charge of the design if we were. But by simply knowing about this architectural battle, you can still choose to support traditional architects given the chance, and realize the effects modern architecture has when in contact with it. So although we have no choice but to swallow the poison as is, we will at least be able to wince as it goes down. Thank you.
Great job. Questions for Sophia?
Great job. What inspired you to pick this topic?
Well, in college, I want to go into architecture, so specifically classical architecture. So that, I think, is the main thing that inspired me towards choosing this topic. And also just seeing the shift from architecture being something that's very beautiful and uplifting to the soul to something that's very degrading, sort of depressing. That also influenced my decision. Yeah.
So if I understood correctly, you were saying in your speech that vertical architecture is better than horizontal architecture because it points towards God. That might not be a fair assessment of your claim. But I was wondering, what about the Tower of Babel? I understand they weren't building towards God, they were just trying to build themselves up higher. But would you say there's any danger in vertical architecture because of that?
I think that the danger more lies in the reason you're trying to lift up to the heavens. With the Tower of Babel, they were trying to reach the same level as God. They were trying to put themselves up as a god and say that they were equal with him. Whereas if you look at a Gothic cathedral, take Notre Dame, for example, you have all of the arches and the vaulted ceilings, and that's all supposed to make the congregation contemplate God and his glory. So I definitely think that it's obviously a difference in execution, but then also a difference in the purpose.
Thank you, great speech.
Great speech. One question I had is that one of the main criticisms of classical architecture is that it can be too costly to build and therefore sell due to its elaborate style. Is it truly worth rejecting all modern architecture when its cheaper costs could allow more people to afford homes, especially considering the current housing crisis?
Excellent question. I didn't actually research this that much, but I would say I would probably argue along the lines of possibly quality versus quantity, not necessarily in that we should get rid of all modern architecture or modern materials, I think specifically. I think you can still build classical architecture with modern materials, but I do think that I would say that you can still build classical architecture with modern materials, and that's still an option to make it cheaper.
Very interesting topic. Great choice. In terms of horizontal versus vertical architecture, sometimes vertical architecture doesn't suit the site where you're trying to build or the materials you have available. Would you say it's, again, a matter of intention versus actual production of the architecture, or is it just like, oh, you have to build horizontal here, that house is still non-classical and therefore bad, even though it's the only way you were able to build in that case?
Let me see if I understand your question completely. Are you talking about like problems with the materials that aren't allowing you to build vertically, or like problems with the site, or?
Well, let's just say in this situation, there's no choice but to build horizontally. But you're still like, I want this house to be a place for my family. You're not trying to build in the modernist style, you just have to build horizontally in this case. Is it still like a bad space because of that?
No, I would not say that. I'd say that it has to do with how the space is formed. So if you see I had a picture of Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright up earlier. All of the lines that he was creating, well, the majority of the lines, were very low and horizontal. So your eye is drawn down to earth more. Whereas in more classical structures, like I said, they utilize domes and arches and stuff to draw the eyes upward. So I think that you can still build a lower house. Like, I'm not necessarily talking like stories within a building, more how the space is formed to draw, like where it's drawing your eye. Does that answer your question?
Good job. Sorry. So my question is, does your view of architecture also influence your view of room design? And like, even if you do have a more horizontal house, would you like change room design to have a more like godly design of the house?
You're talking about interior design? Okay. I would say I would definitely try to design the inside of my home to be more vertical, I guess. Definitely not. This is a hard question. Let's say this. I would definitely say that you should design the interior of your home to reflect God's created order, and that you shouldn't attempt to design it according to more modernist influences. Obviously, you have limits within your home, so obviously doing it to the best of your ability, but yeah.
Excellent job, Sophia.